The gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from California.
I would yield to the ranking member of our Health Subcommittee, someone who served for 4 years as the chair and did so much good for our veterans throughout the nation, Mr. Michaud of Maine.
The gentleman from Maine is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my ranking member, Fillner, for yielding. As my colleagues have stated, our veterans' safety should be one of our top priorities, and the Veterans Sexual Assault Prevention and Health Care Enhancement Act does just that. I'd like to thank Chairman Miller and Ranking Member Bob Fillner, the chair of the subcommittee, as well as all of my colleagues on the House Veterans Affairs Committee for working in such a bipartisan manner to get this very important health care bill to the floor. Within H.R. 2074, I would like to highlight two important provisions. You heard the chairwoman explain the bill very eloquently. The two provisions I'd like to highlight is Section 2, which was offered by the Subcommittee on Health Chair, Ms. Merkel, will correct the troubling findings in the GAO report. The report essentially found that veterans and employees were exposed to personal dangers, including sexual assault. This simply is unacceptable, and I want to thank the subcommittee chair for offering that bill to us. And the second provision I'd like to highlight is in Section 3, my provisions of the bill. Section 3 would provide much-needed flexibility in the way the state veterans' homes get reimbursed for the care that they provide to veterans who need that care for a service-connected condition or a service-connected condition at 70% or greater. This will ensure that these veterans are not put out on the street. The Subcommittee on Health has been working on this bill for well over 2 years, and now I am finally pleased to see that this bill is moving forward, and hopefully my colleagues on both sides of the aisle will support this very important piece of legislation. We have to do all that we can to help our veterans and their families, and this bill is a bill that takes in a different approach to dealing with our veterans and their problems. So with that, Madam Speaker, I would like to I yield back the balance of my time to the chair, to the ranking member.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from the 31st District of Texas, Mr. Carter.
The gentleman from Texas is
I
recognized.
thank the chairman for yielding, and I want to thank the chairman and the chairwoman for adopting H.R. 2074 to include H.R. 1154, Veterans Equal Treatment for Service Dogs, the Vet Dogs Bill. This ensures that veterans with service dogs have equal access to VA facilities. Title 38, it amends Title 38 of the USC to ensure the VA allows medical service dogs in addition to seeing eye and guide dogs in the VA facilities. This is sort of a no-brainer. Medical service dogs usage has been expanded to deal with all types of brain injury, hearing loss, seizures, vets who have lost limbs for assistance mobility, and many other important areas that these service dogs are making our veterans better. Both the ADA and the Rehabilitation Act support this bill. The VA issued a directive recently to allow service dogs into their facilities, good for 5 years. I applaud the VA in that effort, but this bill makes this directive permanent. This is important for these veterans, and if you see them with their dog and you know that the friendship and the love and the affection and assistance these dogs provide is invaluable to our injured veterans. Harry Truman once made the statement, if you want a dog, want a friend in Washington, D.C., get a dog. Well, I'm just trying to make sure, and we are trying to make sure by this bill, that our veterans don't have to leave their friend outside the door. And I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Reserve balance.
The gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from California.
I have no further speakers and would be prepared to close once the chairman had no further speakers.
We have no further speakers.
I thank the chair.
The gentleman from California.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
As I said earlier, this is a bill that has a lot of good things in it. I wish we had gone further, and I would ask the Chair. I met with the GAO this morning, and they said they could follow up reports such as this with investigation of personnel actions, for example, and report back to us in terms that do not violate any of the civil service things about revealing that they would provide a third-party kind of review of the personnel actions that may have resulted from their recommendations. So you don't have to answer now, but I would be prepared to work with the Chair to request such an investigation, because what we have done here is, in response to the report that said reporting requirements were not met in hundreds of cases at some few selected sites that they examined, it adds new reporting requirements. Well, they didn't follow the first ones. What good is more reporting requirements going to do? There has to be some actions on the part of the Veterans Administration that says to our employees, that says to our veterans, there shall be no sexual assaults on our sites. And yet what we're saying here, oh, we'll add a few more reporting requirements. Well, that doesn't send a message, because we already had the reporting requirements. So let's try to find a way, and I'll work with the Chair to do this, to send the message to our agency, not that we're going to pass another few rules, but we're going to take this seriously. We're going to demand that the employees who did not follow what is clearly stated in rule and law about reporting alleged cases of sexual assault, that they did not follow this, they ought to have been terminated, in my opinion. This is so serious and would have sent such a good message to those who might either perpetrate or are victims of such assault. They should have been terminated. I doubt that they were. I would doubt that they were removed from their jobs. I would hope the VA might contradict me. I doubt that there was anything more than a note that they should do better in the future. I hope I'm wrong, but I will tell you the history of personnel actions in response to acts such as these has not been one that gives confidence to me that we have sent the right message. So I would work with the Chair to do whatever we can to send the right message from this Congress and from the American people that these acts will not be tolerated. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California yields back his time. The gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I commit to working with the ranking member on further reporting on these incidents. I would add that this particular piece of legislation does, in fact, incorporate every single recommendation that the GAO gave to this committee in their report. With that, I ask unanimous consent that all members would have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
And I encourage all members to support this legislation and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Florida yields back his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2074 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Without objection, the title is amended. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2302 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 155, H.R. 2302, a bill to amend Title 38 United States Code to direct the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to notify Congress of conferences sponsored by the Department of Veterans Affairs.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Miller, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Filner, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I might consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise in strong support of H.R. 2302 as amended. It amends Title 38 United States Code that directs the Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs to notify Congress of conferences, certain conferences sponsored by the VA. It's a good government bill. It provides additional transparency. It also shifts from VA and the Department of Defense GI Bill reporting requirements from Chapter 30 to Chapter 33. And this legislation is sponsored by the chairman of our subcommittee, of Economic Opportunity, Mr. Stutzman of Indiana. My thanks go out to him, as well as the ranking member, Mr. Filner, and also the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Braley of Iowa, for their efforts. With that, I yield to the distinguished chairman of the Subcommittee on Economic Opportunity, Mr. Stutzman, to further describe H.R. 2302 as amended. Yield him such time as he may consume.
As recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 2302, as amended, contains provisions from 3 different bills. Section 1 retains the transparency concepts in the original version of the bill, but responds partially to VA's concerns about the scope of covering conferences by increasing the reporting threshold to conferences costing $20,000 or more. The catalyst for this provision was a large VA conference held recently in Scottsdale, Arizona that lasted 11 days and included $97,000 for consultant services out of a total cost of $221,500 at a time when every tax dollar is precious. It is our duty to ensure that VA conferences spend those dollars wisely. This would be an appropriate provision in any economic situation, not just in today's stagnant economy. Section 2 includes the provisions of Chairman Miller's bill, H.R. 2388, that would streamline the committee's ability to get information from the VA. It has been our experience that VA incorrectly uses the Health Insurance Portability and Accessibility Act, or HIPAA, to deny or delay providing information needed to resolve our constituents' cases. This bill would make it clear that requests for information for the committee's constitutional oversight duties are deemed to be an authorized disclosure under the Privacy Act and HIPAA. Section 3 includes provisions introduced by the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Disability Assistance and Memorial Affairs, Mr. McInerney, that would require the Department of Labor to include veterans' employment information submitted by federal contractors on the Department's website. Madam Speaker, Title 38 United States Code Section 4212 requires federal contractors to implement an affirmative action plan to hire veterans and to report on the success of that program. It is unfortunate that the Department of Labor, under several administrations, has largely ignored data that shows the extent to which federal contractors are complying with the law. While I'm aware of renewed efforts by the Office of Federal Contractor Compliance to enforce the law, Mr. McInerney's provision will help focus their attention to this issue, and I thank him for this important provision. Mr. Chairman, each of these provisions will increase the transparency of federal programs and improve our ability to hold the federal government accountable for not just funding, but also its actions in managing the programs under our jurisdiction. I'm also happy to report that my amendment has been scored by CBO as having insignificant cost. So I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 2302, and I thank Ranking Member Braley for his support for the subcommittee's work, and I yield back to the chairman.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, we endorse the arguments just made by the chairman of the subcommittee, and I would yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks on H.R. 2302 as amended.
Without objection.
And once again encourage all my colleagues to support this legislation and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the remainder of his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2302 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Without objection, the title is amended. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2349 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 159, H.R. 2349, a bill to amend Title 38 United States Code to direct the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to annually assess the skills of certain employees and managers of the Veterans Benefits Administration and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Miller, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Filner, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I support strongly H.R. 2349 as amended, the Veterans Benefits Training Improvement Act of 2011. It was created by the chairman of the Subcommittee on Disability Assistance and Memorial Affairs, Mr. Runyon. It also was worked in collaboration with the ranking member of that subcommittee, Mr. McNerney. I would like to recognize Mr. Runyon to describe H.R. 2349 as amended. I yield such time as he might consume.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Chairman, thank you again. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 2349 as amended, the Veterans Benefits Act of 2011. There are several components to this legislation, and they're all aimed towards ensuring veterans benefits process is more efficient, accountable, and fair for all veterans and their families. The first piece of this legislation addresses the minimalist approach that the VA has adopted in complying with its employees' skills certification mandate. This section will reverse the current trend within the VA of using the employment certification process solely to increase an employee's pay grade by introducing a pilot program to conduct a biannual assessment for all claims processors and managers. The key to this program's success will be individualized remediation. This will facilitate individual accountability of employees while addressing disparities in experience and training at the pilot sites, eventually throughout the VA. Section 3 prevents the offset of pension benefits for veterans and their family members due to the receipt of payments by insurance or settlements to reimburse expenses occurred after accident or theft. This will be accomplished by exempting reimbursements of expenses related to accident, theft, loss, or casualty loss from determination of annual income. The next section implements the use of electronic communication within the VA to provide notices of responsibility to claimants. This also removes the administrative provisions which have slowed down the process for veterans' disability claims. In total, this section will increase efficiency and help modernize the VA by authorizing more efficient means available for communication while simultaneously removing administrative red tape. Section 5 clarifies the meaning of the VA's duty to assist claimants in obtaining evidence needed to verify a claim. As a result, this section establishes a clear and responsible standard for private record requests as not less than 2 requests. In addition, this section will encourage claimants to take a proactive role in the claims process. This, in turn, will have a positive effect for reducing claims backlog over the long term. Section 6 corrects a serious concern which has curtailed the Second Amendment rights of many VA beneficiaries. Due to unclear and improper statutory language under the current system, veterans seeking help managing their financial affairs are categorized as mentally defective. They are then entered into the FBI database, which prohibits their ability to legally obtain a firearm. This section would restore these veterans' constitutional rights by requiring such determinations to be made by a judge, magistrate, or other judicial authority to properly determine whether such veterans are in fact mentally defective for the purposes of obtaining a firearm. Section 7 of this bill is designed to protect the veterans from being charged excessive fees for aid in submitting applications to the VA for benefits. Since 2006, there have been an increase in non-accredited individuals, organizations, and private companies that have been taking advantage of veterans by charging fees to assist them with filing claims for veterans benefits within the VA. This section reinstates criminal penalties for persons charging veterans unauthorized fees in preparation for filing veterans claims with the VA. The final section addresses the unrestrained government spending on the part of the VA, which is currently permitted to offer pay increases and bonuses to managers and employees who have been cited for mismanagement and poor performance. At a time when our government must be especially prudent in the management of debt, this section establishes caps for bonuses and performance award to VA's most senior employees at $2 million a year, a reduction from $3.5 million. It has been an honor working with my colleagues in a bipartisan manner to move H.R. 2349 as amended forward, and I ask each member and thank them for their timeless support on behalf of our honored veterans. I ask all of my colleagues to join in supporting me on this important legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Reserve our time.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I would yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
This is an ominous, maybe it's ominous too. It's an omnibus, but it is an ominous omnibus that on balance I can't support. In omnibus bills, there are good and they're bad, and we got to balance what the prevailing thing is. Let me tell you why there are two provisions in here that make it impossible for me to support this ominous bill. Section 2 requires the VA to institute a pilot program to hold employees of the Veterans Benefits Administration to annual testing and to even greater training requirements than their current 80 hours at 5 regional offices at a cost of $5 million over 5 years. Now, we're all for training of our employees and want them to do a good job and be adequately trained for it. And Secretary Shinseki has set a goal of processing all claims within 125 days at 98% accuracy. That's a great goal, and we've got to get a handle on that and get a handle on the backlog and the claims that are languishing unnecessarily. I think this provision is misguided because it will stand in the way of reaching the Secretary's goal. Because I don't think we can test our way out of the claims backlog. Anybody can pass a test. The real question is, can they adequately process claims? That is what the VA needs from its employees, not another additional burden resulting in work stoppages, which is what this testing requirement will do. We already have a certification testing program used for the advancement of VBA employees, which we greatly strengthened in the bill we passed in 2008 with great bipartisan support. I think that this bill has redundant testing, a waste of $5 million, and will only go to the fattening of the contractors' pockets who develop the test, money that I think can be more efficiently used to help our veterans. I should remind the body that this mandatory testing provision never passed out of the subcommittee that was responsible for the bill. It failed, it was withdrawn, but it showed up in the full committee markup, and I think violates the spirit of regular order that we supposedly prize. More importantly, Madam Chair, there is a provision in this bill which, let me first state in legal terms and then in English, which would prohibit the reporting of those who have an appointed VA fiduciary to the National Instant Criminal Background Check System required by the Brady Act. What does that mean in English? That means people who have been judged by the VA to be mentally incompetent of handling their own financial affairs qualify to purchase a gun. Hello? We heard the chair of the subcommittee support, oh, this is a constitutional right. Hey, we have a long history of law and precedent which says we can deny rights to mentally incompetent people, especially to own a gun, a handgun. How many people have got to commit mass murders who are mentally incompetent before we understand that we ought to prevent them from getting guns in the first place? And yet we have a justification of that right here in this bill. The gentleman wants to keep the right to purchase firearms until they have a determination from a state judge. Well, that's a non sequitur, Madam Chair. While I agree that some of these people have been judged by the VA not to be mentally competent to handle their financial affairs, may not pose a threat to themselves or others, the prudent course of action, the reasonable course of action, The commonsensical course of action, the course of action that will save lives in this nation, is that we not allow these VA beneficiaries to have access to lethal weapons until the determination is made by that judge. Let's have the determination first, not after they kill somebody. So we're going to put guns in the hands of people who may not be mentally capable of responsible gun ownership. This does not strike the proper balance between ensuring societal safety and individual rights. I don't have to list all the atrocities that have gone on in this nation over the last decade that happened because of irresponsible gun ownership. And yet, we have a defense of a bill that specifically, it doesn't even leave it to implicit, it specifically says, if you are judged to be mentally incompetent, you still have a right to go get a gun. How stupid are we, Madam Chair? Come on. This is a scary thought. It's irresponsible legislating. We've got to do a better job at striking a balance on this issue. Everybody in one bill is afraid of Grover Norquist. Everybody here is afraid of the NRA. Come on. Let's be responsible. Let's be common sense. Let's protect the American people. Let's not go for these pledges that are made in a partisan way to make sure you're reelected and hurt the American people in the long run. That's what we are doing here. This is irresponsible. You give, by law, by a sentence that you put in, Mr. Chairman, you give them a mentally incompetent person, they've already been defined as that, you give them the right to be exempt from the Brady Law's registration. Come on. We can do a better job than that in this body. I would reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Florida. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California.
No more speakers.
I'm sorry, are you concluded your speakers?
We have no more speakers.
Okay. Madam Speaker, again, there's some good provisions in this bill. The Hastings provision is especially proper. But we owe the American people better than just ideological legislating. Because I made this promise, and this is constitutional right. I believe in the Second Amendment. But we can regulate the conditions of that amendment. And this is an especially egregious one. The VA has said that someone cannot manage their own affairs. And yet, we write in a provision that says, okay, go buy a gun anyway, until some judge says you are mentally. Let's have the judge's decision first. Then, if they are judged to be mentally sound, they can buy the gun. That's to be their constitutional right. They don't have a constitutional right to be mentally imbalanced and buy a gun that kills dozens or even hundreds of people. That's what we've seen in this country for decades. Let's do a better job. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. What we owe the United States people is the truth. The truth is that the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee approved under Democrat leadership this exact language under the past two Congresses. In fact, what my good friend, the ranking member, wants to do is to give a bureaucrat within VA the opportunity to adjudicate somebody mentally incompetent. Now, they do have the ability to say that they are not able to control their finances. What this actual legislation does, and I will read, is that it says that they cannot do it without the order or finding of a judge, a magistrate, or other judicial authority of competent jurisdiction that such a person is in danger to himself or to others. I do not believe that a bureaucrat within the Department of Veterans Affairs has that ability nor that authority, and I think that judges need to do it. So we do agree on that particular instance. With that, I ask that all members would have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
And with that, I would urge all of my colleagues to support this outstanding piece of legislation.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2349 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the Chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. And without objection, the title is amended. Okay. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on H.R. 2250.
Without objection, so ordered. Pursuant to House Resolution 419 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 2250. Will the gentleman from Alabama, will the gentlelady from Alabama, Mrs. Roby, kindly take the chair?
In the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 2250, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to provide additional time for the Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency to issue achievable standards for industrial, commercial, and institutional boilers, process heaters, and incinerators for other purposes.
When the Committee of the Whole rose on Thursday, October 6, 2011, Amendment Number 4, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Dole, had been disposed of. And then if he asks for a... Does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
I do, Madam Chair. I have an amendment pre-printed in the record as amendment number 11 to H.R. 2250.
No. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 11, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Waxman of California.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair and my colleagues, I strongly oppose this bill on substantive grounds. It nullifies critical EPA rules to cut toxic air pollution from solid waste incinerators and large industrial boilers. It threatens EPA's ability to issue new rules that actually protect public health by forcing it to set emission standards based on an industry wish list. And on top of that, it allows polluters to avoid compliance with the new rules indefinitely. That is enough for me to vote no. I think this is a very bad bill. But this bill has another mark against it because it does not comply with the Republican leadership's policy for discretionary spending. Some people may think, so what? Why make an issue of this? The simple fact is that the Republicans established a set of rules for the House at the beginning of the Congress, and they aren't willing to play by those rules. When Congress organized this year, the Majority Leader announced that the House would be following a discretionary, what's called a discretionary cut-go rule. When a bill authorizes discretionary funding, that funding must be explicitly limited to a specific amount. And the leader's protocol also required that the specific amount be offset by a reduction in an existing authorization. This bill violates those requirements. First, the bill does not include a specific authorization for EPA to implement the bill's provisions. EPA will have to start anew rulemaking for boilers and incinerators and follow a whole new approach for setting emission standards. And that's going to cost money. CBO, who's the usual referee on these questions, determined that H.R. 2250 does, in fact, authorize new discretionary spending. CBO estimates that implementing this bill would cost EPA $1 million over a 5-year period. But the bill does not offset the new spending with cuts in an existing authorization. That's a clear violation of the plain language of the Republicans' cut-go policy. I know what my Republican colleagues are going to say, because they said it last time we were considering legislation. They will argue that this bill doesn't create a new program. They'll say that EPA can use existing funds to complete the work mandated by the bill. Well, that's now not how appropriations law works. Anyone familiar with federal appropriations law knows this, and the Government Accountability Office or the Congressional Budget Office can confirm it. H.R. 2250 does not include an authorization, but that does not have the effect of forcing the executive branch to implement the legislation with existing resources. To the contrary, it has the effect of creating an implicit authorization of such sums as may be necessary. Now, the Republicans have been against setting authorizations of such sums as may be necessary because they wanted a specific amount and they wanted an offset. My amendment would simply ensure that the discretionary cut-go rule is complied with. It states that if this bill authorizes the appropriations of funds to implement its provisions without reducing an existing authorization of appropriations by an offsetting amount, then the bill will not go into effect. This amendment is about fairness. If I offered a bill to strengthen the Clean Air Act or cut global warming pollution, the Republicans would require my bill to meet the cut-go requirements. But because the Republicans are eager to attack the Clean Air Act and weaken public health protections, all of a sudden their own protocols don't matter. And if they're not complying with cut-go because cut-go, as they've set it up, is infeasible and unworkable, They need to acknowledge that reality and change the requirements. I urge all members to support this amendment. Let's hold the Republican leadership accountable to keep their word. I urge support for this amendment. Yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Madam Chair, I rise in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, H.R. 2250 will reduce regulatory burdens for job creators and extend the time frame for the EPA to issue its rules for boilers and incinerators. Considering that the EPA is currently pursuing an aggressive regulatory regime in these areas and doing so within its existing budget, additional funding should not be needed to provide the regulatory relief provided in this bill. While the CBO's rules may require it to score legislation in a vacuum, in the real world there is no reason taxpayers should be forced to hand over more money when asking an agency merely to do its job. Any cost of common sense regulations in this area, as our legislation proposes, can certainly be covered by the agency's existing budget that has increased greatly over the last several years, and that budget is funding its current regulatory efforts. No new funding is authorized by the legislation, so, Madam Chair, I do not believe any new funding is necessary, and accordingly I would urge my colleagues to vote no on this amendment. And I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Madam Chair, I request a roll call vote.
The amendment is not agreed to. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Madam Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment. Will the gentleman specify which amendment? Will the gentleman specify which amendment?
I've got two amendments.
Right, which one?
Well, I don't know the number, Madam Chairman. Do we have? Which one is 18? I can't hear you. Okay, number 18.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 18, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Connolly of Virginia.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. During the past 10 months, the Republican leadership has already tried to pass more than 125 anti-environmental bills, amendments, and riders. We debated yet another anti-EPA bill just the other day, and the majority rejected every single amendment that would have protected public health. I introduced a simple amendment that would have ensured no deaths or increased incidence of illness would occur as a result of the cement factory bill we debated last week. It would seem to be a modest proposition. The bills passed by Congress should not lead directly to premature death or hospitalization, yet that's exactly what these anti-clean air bills do. Republicans claim that all these anti-EPA bills will create jobs, but sadly those new jobs would only be created in hospitals. The latest Republican attack on the Clean Air Act is H.R. 2250 before us today, which would block public health standards for industrial boilers. The EPA is issuing these standards in accordance with the Clean Air Act, which was passed in 1970 and signed into law by a Republican president. Since 1970, the Clean Air Act has dramatically reduced air pollution, despite population growth, while America's economy doubled in size. The evidence is clear. We do not have to make the false choice between a healthy economy and a healthy environment. Yet that's precisely the false choice presented us in H.R. 2250. My colleagues claim we must allow more mercury pollution, more particulate pollution, more soot in our air in order to spur economic recovery. How easily some seem to forget that this recession started under the most anti-environmental administration in history, that of George W. Bush. So if attacking the environment really did spur economic growth, we wouldn't have had the economic collapse of 2008. The consequence of acting on the false premise presented by my Republican colleagues would be catastrophic for America's health. According to the Nonpartisan Congressional Research Service, by following the law and implementing health standards for industrial boilers, EPA will prevent 2,500 to 6,500 premature deaths every single year. By allowing the EPA to continue implementing the Clean Air Act, we will prevent some 4,000 heart attacks, 4,300 emergency room visits, and 2.2 million lost work days every single year. By preventing all of these premature deaths and pollution-caused illnesses, merely implementing the Clean Air Act rules for industrial boilers will save, taking costs into account, between $20 and $25 billion annually. My simple amendment would allow H.R. 2250 to go into effect if it didn't cause these illnesses and deaths. If, in fact, we can loosen regulations without negative health consequences and without adding to health care costs that are already too high for most families, and then, by all means, let's do it. By passing this amendment, my Republican colleagues can reaffirm their support for deregulation, provided that it doesn't injure or kill our constituents. My amendment says the administrator shall not delay actions to reduce emissions from waste incinerators or industrial boilers if such emissions are causing respiratory and cardiovascular illnesses and deaths. This ensures that if H.R. 2250 passes, we won't be increasing the rate of respiratory disease or sending more children to hospitals with asthma attacks. Since members of the majority claim to be equally concerned about the health of our constituents, I wanted to offer them the opportunity to affirm that interest in statute and pass this amendment, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky rise?
To claim time in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
The gentleman's amendment would add a new section to H.R. 2250 directing the administrator to go on and implement the current boiler sector rules if emissions at industrial facilities are causing respiratory and cardiovascular illness and death, including heart attacks, asthma attacks, and bronchitis. I would like, first of all, to mention that over the last 15 or 20 years, we've made remarkable progress in cleaning up the air. For example, ozone has been reduced by 14%, particulate matter by 31%, lead by 78%, nitrogen dioxide by 35%, carbon monoxide by 68%, sulfur dioxide by 59%. This amendment targets specific health issues, respiratory and cardiovascular illness and death, and the bill directs that EPA to protect public, our bill, I would say, does direct that EPA protect public health, jobs, and the economy, and that's what our legislation is all about, a more balanced approach. I find it interesting that the Boiler Act is all about regulating hazardous air pollutants. But yet, when EPA did their analysis of the benefits of the Boiler Act rule, they did not include any benefits from reduction of hazardous air pollutants, and mercury in particular. They indicated that all of the health benefits would be as a result of reduction of particulate matter. So, the whole purpose of Boiler Act is to deal with hazardous air pollutants. EPA has decided there was no real benefit from reduction there, but it's all from particulate matter. So we oppose this amendment because we really don't think it's necessary. The Clean Air Act sets out very clearly the protections for health and what is required, and we specifically object to this because it's identifying particular illnesses, and we think that EPA should look at a broad range of health issues, and for that reason would respectfully oppose the gentleman from Virginia's amendment.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on...
Madam Chair.
Sorry, for what purpose does the gentleman from California...
I seek recognition in support of the amendment.
The gentleman strike the last word.
I seek recognition to speak in support of the amendment.
The gentleman strikes the last word, and he's recognized for 5 minutes.
I don't wish to strike a last word. I want to speak in favor of the amendment. Is that a grounds for recognition?
Yes, the only way to seek recognition is to strike the last word.
Well, I'll seek recognition to strike the last word. I didn't know I couldn't stand up during the debate on an amendment and speak in favor of the amendment, but I will take it.
It's under the 5-minute rule.
Pardon?
The gentleman is recognized.
Under the 5-minute rule, I'm recognized, and I want the opportunity to respond to the comments that were just made. My colleague from Kentucky keeps on saying that that there will be no benefit from the EPA boiler rules in terms of health. Well, it's true that EPA didn't put a dollar figure on the potential health benefits from reducing emissions of mercury, carcinogens, and other toxic pollutants, but that's not because there won't be any benefits. Allow me to quote from EPA's regulatory impact analysis for the boiler rules, quote, "Data, resource, and methodological limitations prevented EPA from quantifying or monetizing the benefits from several important benefit categories, including benefit from reducing toxic emissions." Notice this doesn't say that cutting hazardous air pollutants from boilers will have no benefit for public health. What are the benefits of cutting mercury pollution here at home? Cutting mercury pollution from boilers and incinerators will reduce localized mercury deposition. Reducing mercury deposition is critical to reducing Americans' exposure to mercury from eating contaminated fish. In 2000, EPA estimated that roughly 60% of the total mercury deposited in the United States comes from man-made air emission sources within the United States, such as power plants, incinerators, boilers, cement kilns, and other sources. These numbers have changed slightly since 2000, but other studies have shown that there's an importance still in reducing local sources of mercury pollution. For example, one study by the University of Michigan and EPA found that the majority of mercury deposited at a monitoring site in eastern Ohio came from local and regional sources. Mercury is a potent neurotoxin. Babies born to women exposed to mercury during pregnancy can suffer from a wide range of developmental and neurological problems, including delays in speaking and difficulties learning. Now, it's hard to translate that into dollars and cents. But what is the value of allowing a child's brain to develop normally so those children can reach their full potential? But this is just common sense. Cutting the emissions of a powerful neurotoxin will help protect children's health. I don't know how anybody can honestly argue that allowing more mercury pollution is better for public health than less. Overall, EPA estimates for the quantified benefits of the boiler rules likely underestimate the total benefits to society of requiring those industrial sources to clean up. Now, EPA looked as well at what the rules would do in terms of the effect of reducing emissions of fine particle pollution, which can lodge deep into the lungs and cause serious health effects. Breathing particle pollution has been found to cause a range of acute and chronic health problems, such as significant damage to the small airways of the lungs, aggravated asthma attacks in children, death from respiratory and cardiovascular causes, including strokes, increased numbers of heart attacks, especially among the elderly and in people with heart conditions, increased hospitalization for cardiovascular disease, including strokes and congestive heart failure, and increased emergency room visits for patients suffering from acute respiratory ailments. By cutting emissions of fine particles, EPA estimated that these rules will prevent up to 6,600 premature deaths, 4,100 non-fatal heart attacks, 42,000 cases of aggravated asthma, 320,000 days when people miss work or school each year. EPA found that these rules will provide at least $10 to $24 in health benefits for every dollar in costs. That's a tremendous return on investment and doesn't even include the benefits of the toxic air pollution, toxic mercury pollution, which is harder to quantify, but is there nevertheless. So the amendment is straightforward. It states the bill does not stop EPA from taking action to clean up air pollution from a dirty boiler or incinerator if that facility is emitting pollutants that are causing heart attacks, asthma attacks, and bronchitis or other respiratory and cardiovascular disease. The Republicans argue that this bill is not an attack on the Clean Air Act or public health. They argue this bill won't prevent EPA from requiring boilers and incinerators to cut their pollution. I disagree, so I support adding language to the bill, making it perfectly clear EPA must act, and I urge my colleagues to support this amendment.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Madam Chairman,
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
on that matter, I'd request a roll call.
Okay. The amendment is not agreed to. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia will be postponed.
Does the gentleman from Massachusetts rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment. Is the gentleman offering amendment number 7?
Amendment number 7. I rise as designee to offer amendment number 7.
Parliamentary inquiry.
Gentleman from Kentucky has an inquiry.
Yes, I'm not really positive what the rules are here, but the gentleman from Massachusetts says that he has amendment number 7, and in the list of amendments that we have, the sponsor of number 7 is said to be Mr. Quigley of Illinois. Would the chair be able to explain to me what the rules are in regard to that?